Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining. Thanks for those that have joined in person, as well as those that are joining online. So just starting off with the acknowledgement of country. We live and work on the lands of the First Nations people. We'd like to pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. So a little bit about Luminary. We've been making digital bright and the human experience brighter since 1999. We've been working with some of the brightest brands in the country, including some multinational companies like Adobe, as well as lots of not-for-profits like Fred Hollows Foundation, Save the Children, Cancer Council, as well as consumer product brands like Clipsal and many financial services organizations as well. We have more than 75 staff across 5 locations. And one of the things that we're really proud of is the tenure, how long people stay at Luminary. It's one of the things that we invest in, creating a really great place to work so that we have our people to look after our clients. We're proud to be a certified B Corp, certified in 2021. And what that means for us is all about focusing on the triple bottom line of people, planet, and profit. What do we do? All of the work we do revolves around these 3 key phases of explore, build, and grow. In the explore phase, we look after our clients' digital strategy. We help them with user research, user testing, help them uncover insights, uncover their technology strategy before we move into the build phase, where we help our clients with websites and web applications. And then we look after their sites, their digital assets from an ongoing support and optimization perspective. From a technology point of view, we are agnostic. We look after a number of platforms for our clients, and we're proud to have 5 of our key partners here tonight for the panel, including Content.ai, Optimizely, Sitecore, Content Stack, and Embraco, with Philip joining remotely from Europe. So in terms of what we're going to cover, Andy's going to talk about the evolution of the headless market. We're then going to have an introduction of the vendor expert panel before we jump into questions. At the end, we'll be taking questions on Slido that I'll be sharing very soon. And we really welcome the crowd, the audience, to ask questions as we go and put some difficult questions to these panelists. We'll see what they come up with. So I'll hand over to Andy Thompson now. Andy's our CTO, one of the directors of Luminary. He's been in the industry for over 20 years, started building websites when he was a baby, and has built content management systems himself. He's built a number of websites across all the platforms that we're going to be talking about today. Really lucky to have him, and he's going to be hosting and comparing the panel today. So welcome, Levy. Welcome, Andy.
Thanks very much, Adam. Round of applause. I haven't even done anything. Thank you very much. So I just wanted to set the scene, I guess, for tonight and talk a little bit about the evolution of the headless market. Now, everyone knows the evolution of digital has been going for a long time, but the headless CMS market is more recent. Only 4 years ago, we hosted a panel in this same room with one of the same people, actually, 2 of the same people maybe, on the panel. And this was the topic of the entire panel. The topic of the entire panel was, what is a headless CMS? That's how immature the headless CMS market was back then. Also, our graphics weren't quite as developed. My design director, Tom, didn't want me to use this image, but this is the image we were using in our posts and everything back then, because we really were trying to explain headless CMS in very simple terms, almost like using cartoons and things like that. But on his advice, and being 2023, I've asked the AI to generate me some better images for the rest of the show tonight. So this is my new robot saying, what is headless CMS? So what is headless CMS? I mean, everyone here probably knows, but if you don't, it's essentially the concept of separating the storage and management of your content from the concept of how you deliver and present that content, whether it be on a website or some other channel. It's that idea of decoupling it so the CMS doesn't necessarily worry about the presentation, just the management of the content. 7 years ago is actually when we started with Headless CMS. Go back another few years ago. And back then, the concept was very new. It was not well understood by developers or agencies or the vendors. There were a couple of dedicated headless CMS vendors on the market, but they were seen as pretty risky startups, and people were pretty hesitant to dive straight into headless. But fast forward to headless CMS today, it's definitely, you can see all the charts about how we've gone from early adopter through to early majority, probably in terms of the adoption cycle of these sort of things. It certainly hasn't replaced a traditional CMS, but it's definitely in the everyday language. It's no longer a buzzword. People are talking about it, whether you like it or not. People are coming to us, for example, in platform selections, and typically they're coming to us, and one of the key questions that they're tackling early on is, do I want headless or do I want a more traditional approach? So that's the topic of the panel tonight. And by the same token, it's rare to find a CMS vendor now that isn't also tackling this question, whether it's from their customers or from agencies or internally, is how do they service these headless use cases? The vendors also have different approaches, it's fair to say. So with the emergence of this whole market about headless, we've also seen the emergence of different ways to do headless. So at one end of the spectrum, you've got your pure play cloud first headless only that doesn't even concern itself with the presentation layer. Somewhere in the middle, you've got these more traditional CMSs who have created. So the examples of the first one there would be like Content Stack or Content.ai that we have on the panel tonight, a pure play cloud headless. In the middle somewhere, you've got your traditional vendors who have created new products to service the headless market. So alongside it, so Embraco have released Embraco Hardcore to leverage some of their existing technology, but have a specific product, or Sitecore's Content Hub 1 that's just coming out soon. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you have the hybrid platforms, which have retained all the power of their traditional CMS, but have added on new APIs, new use cases, new powerful ways to service both the headless and traditional out of the same platform. So that's a good segue into talking about some of the vendors we have tonight. So what I might do is introduce our panelists to come forward at this point and hear from them about how they work with headless. Abracadabra. Philip appear. Here he is. So I'm going to give you guys, hey Philip, nice to meet you on the big screen. We almost had them lined up perfectly with the pictures by accident. Isn't that amazing? Did we swear? Fantastic. All right, thanks guys. Thanks. You've just made this look so professional. Yeah. Everyone, round of applause. So what am I doing? Appreciate your time. Very briefly, we have Jerry from Sitecore. We have Jake from Content Stack. We have Jake from. I'm reading too many words. We have Jake from Content.ai. We have Dean from Optimizer. We have Nick from Sitecore. The crowd goes wild. And we have Philip from Embraco. Now, I'm going to give these guys a minute or two to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about their platform. So I'll go in that order that I just started. Jerry, why don't you kick us off, mate?
Yeah, hi, I'm Jerry. I lead the region for Content Stack. We are a founder of the Mac Alliance. We provide headless CMS and automation platform, primarily really allowing organizations, tech teams, and marketers to choose the right tech and the right platform for the right project. So really not putting ourselves into the bucket of needing to have a one-stop shop, but having a choice of technologies for your project. Here in Australia, we've got about 45 customers or so. That's double what we had a year ago. And out of the 400 or so customers we've got across APAC and the world, most of those have come from the traditional approach and have moved to that headless approach of building out their tech stacks. On to you.
Hi guys, so I'm Jay Cooler from Content.ai. I'm the pre-sales engineer. So what my role involves is pre-sales activities. So I'll build out proof of concepts, answer RFPs. I'll also evangelize the product a little bit. So I've got some videos on LinkedIn or YouTube and so forth. And I do some pre-sales activities as well. Like I help run content modeling workshops, content audits, solution architecture workshops, etc. So our platform is a pure play headless CMS, cloud hosted SaaS product. We're also a member of the Mac Alliance as well. So one thing we do really well is content orchestration. We've got fantastic content orchestration tools. which I'll be speaking to as the session goes on.
I'm Dean Barker. I am the Global Director for Content Management for Optimize. Optimizely is a full stack DXP suite. The CMS used to be a company called Episerver. We acquired Optimizely. We took their branding last year. Prior to working here, I've worked here for 4 years. Prior to this, I was a partner of Episervers for 15 years. So I've been working with our content management system for almost 2 decades. I've been working in content management for 25 years. I think I got on the web in like 1995. I was building my first CMS in 96, and I've been in content management pretty much solely since then. I've been writing and speaking about content management for the last 20 years.
And I'm Mr. Wingo. I am the Director of Sales Engineering for Sitecore, probably looking after that ANZ market. Sitecore's gone through change, I think, in the last couple of years. We, much like our Optimizely, full stack DXP, the winds of change have come through, and composable is really that new sort of approach from a lot of customers and vendors out there. So we've tried to get on that sort of approach as well, and some of that's been through acquisition of sort of best of breed tools in that, and the real key focus of that, which is great sort of segue in the topic today, is headless. All of those acquisitions have to really match into that headless architecture and how we can bring all of those together in a composable nature to provide very much of what we had in the platform DXP, but giving just more flexibility to our customers to really pick and choose what they want against what sort of their challenges are to meet those and deliver the best experience as well.
Thanks, Mick.
Philip?
Good evening, everybody. My name is Philip. I am the CTO at Umbraco. I'm coming to you here from my home office in Denmark. Here it's 8:25 in the morning. I just sent my kids off to school, so while you'll be toasting in beers afterwards, I'll be starting work, and you'll probably be see me sipping coffee as we go along. But super nice, super happy to be part of this. Umbraco is a classic CMS as well. We are open source. We're on the .NET stack, and we just celebrated our 18th birthday as an open source project. So we've been around the block for a while as well, and we're happy to work with Luminary and lots of other partners around the world. As you were saying, Andy, what we've done is we have some headless capabilities in our core CMS, and then we've built a product on top of that is then a software as a service headless offering that we call Umbraco Hardcore, and where you see, I mean, we're an open source company, so we have a commercial offering that is Umbraco Cloud, which is classic platform as a service Umbraco, where you can run your own code and do anything you want. And then, as I said, Hardcore is the software as a service version where there's no code, no templates, it's customizations, it's making configuration instead, and then a global delivery layer that actually makes sure that the APIs are super fast and available anywhere in the world, no matter where your customers are. So that's kind of our take on it.
Right. Thanks, Philip. So, look, I'm sure, hopefully everyone now understands we've got a broad range of vendors here with a broad range of approaches to headless, and between them an incredible amount of experience in this industry, and from before, during, and post, I guess, the headless hype. So the topic of the panel tonight, as we put it to the audience, was headless versus traditional. It seems a little bit aggressive, but which one is right for you? So a few of the questions I'm going to be asking you are how to decide between which approach you should take. So I thought I'd just kick it off with a fairly high level one. The pros and cons of going with a headless approach as you see them. What are the pros? And definitely make sure you mention some cons as well. So why don't we go in reverse? Why don't we kick it off with you, Philip?
Yeah, absolutely. I used to work on the agency side as well. So I've been doing a lot of these talks in the past. I think to me the biggest advantage is the decoupling that you were introducing in the beginning, Andy. The fact that, you know, in your entire stack of technologies that you work with, whether that's be your ERP or CRM or Commerce Engine or whatever, they may not necessarily have the same lifetime. Typically, you know, your ERP lives for 10 years, but your website only lives for 10 months. and you want to be able to switch them independently of each other. And that decoupling, I think, is probably the biggest advantage to me. And I mean, of course, also just letting data just be data and not be too concerned about presentation. I think that's also a pretty strong pro. And if I should go into a con, I think there's some added complexity, or there can be some added complexity depending on, of course, how complex your setup is. I think if you're doing that setup with tens of integrations, it probably doesn't add complexity. But if you don't really need headless, if you're just building a website with no integrations, you're just adding more complexity on top. And with that, I think one of the trends that we're seeing is people starting to talk and ask a lot more about sustainability. And I think sometimes from a sustainability standpoint, headless can be a con in itself because of that added complexity, where traditionally you would only need one web server to run a website. Now you'd need at least two. And of course, that's twice the amount of carbon being emitted into the atmosphere and stuff. So there is some cons to it, but I think, I'm not a skeptic. I think overall it's in many cases it's a good trade-off.
Thanks, Phil. Mick? I think flexibility and agility work quite hand in hand with headless. Front end is a pretty key focus on experiences and being able to deliver those right experiences to sort of the end customer. So having the agility with something like a headless CMS means those teams can pick the technology right fit for that, without having to worry about sort of what's being encumbered by the back end CMS technology. And I think the agility also comes from the rapid delivery that you can get out of that type of process as well. So if you think about a traditional CMS and how fast you can deploy out, it's not always the fastest part of application development. Whereas with headless, and when you've got that decoupled front end from that, deploying front end can be really agile, really quick. So when you're able to take that back to a business and start giving them those really added advantages that they can start really churning out the feature and the value back to the customers. But there's a really good story about headless there for that.
I think building on what Mick just said, I think one of the biggest things is distribution of development load. When you work with a traditional kind of full stack CMS, everybody involved in the development process that comes into contact with it needs to be trained on that stack. They need to understand that technology. When you're able to decouple, especially the front end, you can have a development team that doesn't need to be concerned with the other parts of the stack. So you can distribute load. Before I came to work here, I was a partner, I worked in services. And especially when you work in a smaller company, my company topped out at about 26, 27 people. Just load distribution gets so complicated. You have skills, but you don't have the skills available at the time you need them. So if you can come up with a system that can allow you to distribute skills more easily and allow teams to work without interrupting other teams, that's very, very helpful. In terms of cons, my standard line has always been that headless doesn't really resolve any complexity. It just kind of moves it around. Instead of being complex in one place, it's now complex in like 5 different places. And I maintain that there's a lot of people saying, well, headless solutions are so much simpler. Well, no, they're not. Your complexity is now you just have this massive gargantuan React app instead of this complexity in the back end. So I think that stories about headless's simplicity and any resolving of complexity are maybe a bit overblown. So that's one con.
Right. I think it's the flexibility to scale within the microservices architecture. So being on a headless platform, you jump onto a microservices or composable architecture. And an example would be you might start your digital operations with headless CMS and maybe one web channel. And as your organization's digital presence grows, you might want to increase your customer engagement. So you can pull in an online forms service, for example, into your microservices architecture. Your business might then want to pivot slightly and begin selling products online, for example. So you're pulling some sort of e-commerce tool as well, like a Shopify or something like this. And your customer engagement grows even more. So you pull in a CRM, let's say something small to start with. As you sell more products, you get something more enterprise grade. So you can swap that CRM out, put in something more enterprise level, like a Salesforce. And then let's say after a year or so, you start to realize that maybe your e-commerce presence isn't doing that well. So you're going to sort of pivot back to what you did best before. So you can cut that e-commerce platform out. You can scale back your CRM to something more simple. So you can see, I guess in this example, at no stage do you need to just grab everything and just roll it out and re-platform. You're sort of picking and choosing your information, your microservices architecture as your business dynamically goes through these evolutions. So I think that's like a massive plus of a headless CMS. And I think more broadly speaking, that microservice architecture. A con would be, I think, the other side of that same coin, where it's in the planning of your microservice architecture. So it's not as simple as grabbing an all-in-one DXP off a shelf, installing what you need to install on a server and just running with the services that it gives you. You do have to plan a lot more. You have to plan all the pieces that fit into your microservice architecture. That can be a bit risky. Having said that, that does give you that massive flexibility going forward. So,
yeah. Points there. I think that's a good point about having the choice and allowing marketing and business teams to choose the right microservice for project. What that is today and what that is in 2 years, what that is in 3 years, you don't really know. So having that headless approach allows you to swap and change different components of microservices and not lock yourself into one sort of monolithic platform. The other thing that we see at Content Stack is over 75% of our customers do things across multi-channel. That's something that is very difficult to do with a non-headless system. That is very app first, digital signage, instead themes, point of sale. That's key. In fact, most of the customers that come to us have that as a primary channel, not the web. That's really something that you can't do easily without a headless system that is true headless. Putting APIs on top of a monolithic system is slightly different. In terms of why you would want to go and what the cons are of headless, I think there's two guardrails in terms of these platforms that will be around for like 15, 20 years. But do that. They have guardrails around producing websites and how you do that. It's been tried and tested. So there's less decisions to be made. There's less sort of thought that needs to go into that to produce just a website. So I think if you're producing just a website, go traditional, probably quite a good approach. You don't need to speak too much about it. It's been done many, many times before.
Yeah, sure. So there's a real theme there of the added complexity and being, be ready for what you're biting off, being prepared. I loved some of the other points. A few years ago, trying to sell headless, everyone was just showing, that diagram that had a smartwatch and a smart car and all this kind of stuff. And that was essentially the conversation was that it was about APIs and everything. But I love that I'm hearing here that it's, about distributing within your workforce as well, giving your team the flexibility to work on different parts, things like that. There's really good points there, guys. You spoke about multi-channel just then, Jerry, and I just basically, said we used to talk about that, but a lot of what we're talking about is still websites today. I wondered if I could ask you guys, what other channels are you seeing? And Jerry, you just mentioned a couple of them, so I might start with you. But like, if you could pick one really, really interesting use case of a channel that you're seeing, or a couple of channels that you're seeing that are non-web, are people using multi-channel, and how are they using them really well, really effectively?
Yeah, definitely. So, the most common channel outside of web is definitely native apps. That's Android and iOS apps. And we've got obviously SDK, so people build those out pretty quickly. We're seeing digital signage as another thing as well. Like if you've got content in an organization that's done for approvals workflow, then you can push that out to your stores. It's even gone further. We've got a few retailers here in Australia that are actually using that in their point of sale as well, so that people in stores can actually use that that approved marketing material in store. And that's a reality of exactly what you said, Andy. Before headless, this was just sort of PowerPoint. Today we're seeing this as a reality. 75% of our customers have multi-channel.
Yeah, great. Jake, what's a channel you see implemented really well outside of web?
Yes, I think, Andy, what's your point? I know that diagram very well, where you have this headless CMS in the middle, and you have this sort of scattering of Internet of Things devices, from smartwatch to website, an electric car, a VR headset, and so forth. I know the question is what is sort of apart from web as a channel, but I just wanted to mention what we are seeing predominantly is actually web, but it's but it's a multi-site web. So separate websites. So separate website channels is probably the biggest thing. But now I'll go back to the original question. Yeah. What we're seeing is, so being in that sort of enterprise space where content.ai sits, one channel that's not really talked about a lot, because it's maybe not as cool as some of these, cool devices that you see, is portals. So like, when we're implementing content.ai within like a government customer or, some large organization, that same sort of size, we're also integrating into their internal portals. So like their intranets, their help desk systems, those sorts of things that you don't really hear many use cases about. So, but also I'm display panels. So I was a big skeptic, when I used to see this display panel thing, like we really want to put things in display panels years ago, but no, that's actually like a massive one as well that we're seeing. So we've recently worked with a client in the fitness industry. So they're national, and what they're doing with display panels is they're using content.ai to serve their web channels, but also in every one of their gyms, they have these display panels which source from content.ai their timetable data. So for each one of those locations, they're getting the daily and the weekly timetables, are plastered on the walls. So that's like a really cool use case of display panels. Yeah.
Cool. Hey. For our customers, web would be primary, certainly, but after that, you would have email and probably social. What we're trying to get our customers to understand is there's a difference between content and artifact. Content is the idea, it's the message, it's the idea you want to put in your customer's head. Artifact is just kind of the horse it rides in on. And when we look at a web page in a browser, we always look at that and say, oh, well, that's content. Well, it's really not. That's a web page built on content. What we're trying to get our customers to understand, especially with our acquisition of the CMP platform last year, is that the content, the idea, the message that you're getting across, that's the kind of background to all the different artifacts. A piece of content should give birth to more than one artifact. You have an idea, you have a messaging point that you want to get across, develop that content, and then develop an artifact, a web page artifact, and you develop an email artifact, and you develop a social artifact. So we're trying to get that across to our customers. The really effective content teams are concentrating on content, and then artifact production is really a separate step. But for us, it would clearly be web, email.
Yeah, I've seen that as well from the agency side as a key piece, whether someone's traditional or headless, is getting them to think in that content first mindset, think about their content modeling, think about their content, and then worry about.
When I've been talking about this, I've accepted fault for this. And I think there's a lot of vendors like myself and my friend Mick here that for a long time, we confused the concept of content and artifact.
Yeah.
And our systems for years, when you were creating content, you were also creating a web page, you were also creating an artifact. And we've backed away from that with our acquisition last year, and we did the same thing, acquiring kind of a content marketing platform. We're separating, we're unthreading content from artifact, which I think is a healthy way to look at it.
Yeah, that's headless.
Yeah, agree with all of the channels. I think we're all in the same sort of position there, but I think what gets born out of that as well is the speed and scale that you can get out to new and emerging markets. We've been talking about omni-channel and multi-channel for years now. I think it's important to remember what happens before you get to that point. Having conversations with customers where they might not necessarily are ready for that new channel yet, but when that happens, they need to be able to do that really efficiently. If you don't have that content, modeled correctly and reusable, and give those content teams that efficiency and scale to really rapidly plan out what they're trying to deliver to, and then say, yep, we want to switch on that new channel. We don't have to worry about remodeling our content and putting that complexity behind it. That's where you're going to get that speed to market, which I think Headless does quite a really good job.
Sure.
Philip?
Yeah, I don't think I have too much more to add. I was going to make the same point that, multiple websites is probably the first thing, the first extra thing that you do. And I mean, we see that other places as well. So like when we do commerce, then there's the in-store component, which may be point of sale, but it may also be like some kind of, self-service buy stuff that's not in stock in the store that you're in, or but the point that you can have multiple, kind of heads on the same, for the same use case or for the same position. I think that kind of, that's probably the trend that we're seeing.
Thanks, Philip. It's actually a brilliant segue to my next question. A few of you have mentioned that still, even though there are extra channels, and that, thank you, great examples there, and please consider the extra channels here, but there's still the majority probably web. Say you're operating in a web environment and you've headless, you've thought about your content first. What kind of heads are you then seeing people implement? I mean, obviously for site code optimizely, there's a head in the box, but so maybe what are that head, but other heads you're looking at on different channels? If everyone knows what I mean by which heads you're putting on the headless CMS. So basically you're headless. What are you seeing implemented on these different channels most commonly?
Yeah. Nick? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, you go. No, I was going to start with someone different. It's good.
Right. I think front-end technology is just really leading the way there. So I think React, Next.js, these type of frameworks are really exploding and being a big focus. And I think that's where when XM Cloud for cycles come along and really look to address that market, give the developers that freedom of choice to really align with that. So I think that's probably the most predominant head that we're seeing. Static site generation is really showing itself up as well. So that's another quite common approach that we're seeing.
I think it's wild how much front-end delivery has fractured. And I think that we're seeing so many different variations on the same theme of how do you handle that very last mile of delivery, right? Data's on the server. How do you get it to a browser? And it started off that people are doing bespoke headless and then they're doing React apps. Well, are they doing a multi-page React app? Are they doing a SPA? Are they doing a progressive web app? Are they now static site generating? HTML as a service, like Hotwired and HTMX and these frameworks. There's so many different ways to solve the problem of getting data formatted into an artifact and getting it in front of a user. And so most of the heads that we're seeing are just kind of variations on that theme. I hate to even call those heads though, because to me, I mean, that's just a templating decision. I get frustrated when customers think, well, I'm going to do something in React, so I need a pure headless CMS. No offense, guys, but I don't think you do. That's a last stage templating decision. We have customers using our software to template in React and template in all these different systems. So I'm even hesitant to call those a different head. They're just multiple different ways to kind of solve that final end stage delivery problem.
Yep, I think I could speak to front-end technologies for that sort of web channel, but that's what we hear most often. So I'll probably speak to those portals again that I mentioned earlier. Those that we are seeing those larger clients, and those are the interesting ones because they can vary in how the data is actually sourced from the CMS into them. There's no sort of standard where there's like some sort of React app or anything like that. Could be a Python script, could be some some way to deal with the API that's quite unique to that use case. I guess a good example to give of an existing client who uses a portal like this is one in the retail space, and they've got a web presence, but they've also got an internal help desk system. And an example is a content item that they have pertaining to a 30-day return policy. And when they propagate this content to their web channels, that's available on like multiple web channels, a mobile app, for example, where you might get to an FAQ section or something like this, and you get that return policy, details given to the end user. But also there'll be someone sitting in the back office on a help desk call with a customer discussing the return of some items, and in their help desk portal, they can actually source that same piece of content and see the terms and conditions and articulate that back to the person they've got on the phone call. And that's exactly the same piece of content. If that changes in the single source of truth CMS, it propagates to all channels when it's all published. So yeah, I think those sorts of channels I think need a bit more discussion on social and those sorts of places, because they kind of get missed, but they're actually quite important, quite big. Yep. Jerry, any?
Yeah, no, pretty much covered that there. So when we're seeing a lot of the front-end frameworks, next React to really popular these days. I guess that 4 or 5 years ago, that was Angular. I think the point is that a lot of it's standardized with these frameworks as well, so that, developers can get on board much quicker than they would do product development. well aware they were .NET, PHP, Java. It would take people a lot of time, and it was very bespoke development. These days, I'm very standardized, almost commoditized at the front end, and you can get science out really quickly with that. So that's really the way the best developers are going. They really want to use those sort of frameworks. And those that are from the older school, using .NET and Java, obviously there are SDKs and content that you can use those as well. But the whole point is a big choice, the front end technology outlet.
Cool.
Yeah, not too much. I think you're making a lot of good points. I think the API flexibility of having GraphQL or REST, like having multiple ways that you can get your content to whatever, it gives you that flexibility in choosing that head. I think that's an important point. And then I think one of the pitfalls, sorry to write the sustainability to wagon again, but I mean one of the pitfalls that I see sometimes is that people are super trying to optimize with static site generation, and if you don't think really carefully about that, you can really end up shooting yourself in the foot and regenerating tens of thousands of pages over and over and over again without any changes to them if you're not doing it the right way. So there's some caveats that you really need to take into account when you design your system.
I think that's so that not shooting yourself in the foot by if your aim was to be efficient and build this page only once for 1,000 visitors, but you end up building it 100 times to one thing. What was the point of that? So that was the static site generators as well, which is another head. I know we're seeing came in as an early trend with the headless CMSs. Was that one of the benefits is you could use the static site generator, but it's almost coming full circle again now. All you guys pointed to a couple. I might just give you an opportunity this time to maybe just play your platform a little bit. What's one really good use case you've seen? You all mentioned a couple of different opportunities, a couple of generic situations. Jake, you mentioned a couple there. What's one really good use case that you've seen implementing headless where you're like, yep, that was the right decision to go with a headless approach there rather than the traditional just sort of CMS renders web pages? You want to go first?
I think the key is the difference between a website and a web application. That's what we used to talk about back in the day, website and web application. Is it one-way communication or is it two-way communication? If you just have a system that's pushing content out, it's an informational marketing page, just information about your company, I don't think there's a lot of value there. I mean, you're fundamentally pushing one payload of data into the browser. Where headless works really well is a highly interactive scenario. E-commerce is a great example. In that situation, you're sending a lot of information back to the server. You're getting partial page updates, like you maybe need to update shipping terms or update the shopping cart information. Someone needs to add something to their cart or delete something to the cart. That's a web application. That involves two-way communication. There's no question that a full-featured headless framework is the way to go there. It's just the other side of the coin. I see companies just doing straight publishing, kind of jumping on a headless client templated bandwagon just because they're being told to, or maybe they think they're missing out when there's really no tangible value add for them. It sounds really trendy and interesting, but at the end of the day, are their end users any better off for that? Not really, but highly interactive e-commerce, probably the easiest low-hanging fruit there.
We different what specific use and it's sort of that simple web publishing the static site generator. Now we see headless is real. Anyways, good use test.
Yeah, I mean, we've got I've been working the last couple of months on this one here, but it's a retailer here that really wants to use the same content from their e-commerce website. They're going to be putting together different components for CDP, commerce, content stack, the CMS, search, but also use that in store. But they're using it not only in the tiles so that people have that on the iPads in store with the same content and ability to check out on behalf of the client, but also on the point of sale. So they can have actually 3 channels off the back to start with, which is mobile apps, in-store, and website, and be able to use the same content, the same products from the commerce platform, the same search that's put together. You're doing it once and you're utilizing it across multiple channels. This is something that would take years and years to do, and they tried to put it on one platform before it failed. Right, it was too hard. So that's a really good use case when you really have the omni-channel goals for engagement. And a lot of retailers are trying to do that these days because they get used as libraries, or when people go in there, have a browse, and then go out and go and wide on Amazon and eBay like that. So having that sort of consistent brand in store and online and throughout matters differentiator.
Right. Next time.
Yeah, I think that bi-directional content flow is actually a really, really good example. Where the CMS isn't just this aggregator of content to these channels. It actually is a much more critical piece of this composable architecture. So Content.ai has got a suite of APIs. The two that come to mind for this example is the delivery API, which lets channels consume content from the CMS. And there's also the management API, which allows applications to write data into the CMS. And there's a couple of examples that I can give of existing clients. So there's a broadcasting company who's a client, and what they've got is they've got a website where musical artists can create a profile page for themselves, and they've got their music that they can upload, and then members of this portal can go online, they can view this artist's page, they can listen to music, they can rate and they can comment on their work. And the way that they comment is via the management API from the web channel, for example. They're writing into the CMS. So there's a whole content model piece around consuming the data, and then that gets propagated through the appropriate workflows. It gets moderated, and then once it's published, it then gets pushed out via the delivery API onto our web channel. But it's that bi-directional content flow where it's not just about serving a couple of channels. It's actually a much more critical piece in the operations of this company's digital presence. Another one is an airport where they've got a multitude of information, and that information needs to be translated into multiple languages, being an international airport. So in the workflow, at some point, the content that's written in English is then pushed out to an external microservice, which is a translation service that gets translated into X number of languages that need to be supported, then gets written back into the CMS. So that content is then enriched quite a lot than what it started as. And then, those language variants are created, and then that's propagated onto a web channel, for example. So it's this processing of the content via this external service, and then it enhances that content, I guess. And that's a really nice example as well.
Exactly. We've got a customer at the moment who's well on their headless journey. So from a website perspective, that's working really well. So the focus for them is really about native mobile app, and that's the decision that they've made around adopting that channel. So for them, it was then saying, well, let's actually start building that foundation of our content, and then know that the first channel that we're going to go into is the mobile channel. So structure all of that. The way that they're doing that as well is that we've got such a vast array of content that they have to deal with. And it's not just around articles or things like that, but it's about label information that they know we need to change that on a fairly regular basis, to the point around language translation and those sorts of things. Not every language needs translation either. So being able to support that fallback of languages as well, again, to make that content authoring process simpler. So that's a use case for us, that the customer's on with that journey, and they're in that, they've modeled out their content, they understand what that structure is, and they're really pushing into that channel now around the mobile app. And it's that, again, that freedom of flexibility for that team building mobile app. They just know they have to hit that API endpoint to grab whatever information they need. It's not being dictated to them around what that information needs to be. It's really up to that specific application. They can just work at their own pace and deliver that, get the content and deliver it out in that channel.
Thanks, Mick. Over to you, Philip.
I'm sorry, Andy, your mic was cutting out, so I didn't really get the original question.
This is sorry about that, everyone. I fixed it now. Can you hear me okay now, Philip?
Yeah, it's better. It's better with that.
So basically, can you give me one excellent sort of best case use case for headless? So what's one that's just like, yes, that was the right decision for headless. That's how you do it.
Yeah, I think what Dean started out with saying, like the commerce scenario is the most obvious one, where there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of stuff going back and forth, and also, as I was mentioning earlier, a lot of different heads or like channels on top of that. I think that's probably the most obvious use case. But yeah, there's so many scenarios. To me, it comes down to like the number of like moving parts in your setup and how decoupled you want them. So yeah, I don't think I have too much to add to that.
That's fine. That's fine. Thanks, guys. That's really good. You know, to the point. I might just take this moment to point out to everyone in the room and online that there are a bunch of Slido questions coming in. So thank you very much for that. You can also upvote questions in Slido if you just agree that that's a really good question and you'd like that to be at the top of the list. We will get to those questions pretty soon. So I'll just ask a couple more questions. I need to, first of all, I do need to ask the flip side, basically, of that question, which might be tough for the headless only guys, but not just a good use case. What's a good example of when an organization should probably not be going headless? Who wants to start? Mick's about to start talking. Okay, sure. We'll start with the headless guys.
When do you not want to go? Well, I guess there is a certain amount of thought and technical planning that needs to go into a headless build. If you don't want to do that, we don't want the appetite for that. The guardrails of that monolithic, web-only traditional platform, it lends itself to that. Because there is some thought that needs to go into a headless. What do you find with most organizations that do is about many different services or SaaS options anyway. But for that initial phase one, if it's very basic, it's a website, go for it.
That's great. I'm nodding like you agree.
I agree with Jerry's point. So that's sort of the main one. Another one that I can think of really is, so being from that sort of agency side, and working a lot of DXP in the past, I think when an organization is geared technically in such a way where they need to manage their presentation layout within the CMS, so all the fooling around creating, a master page layout, a home page layout, internal page layouts, etc. If they're technically geared towards that, and they don't want to move beyond being consuming APIs and building on whatever tech stack that they want, like some sort of modern JavaScript framework, then yeah, stick with the model, because I think it does a good job of that. And yeah,
I said the word monolith.
I bristle at the word monolith, not for this question, but I hope monolith versus composable comes up later.
Jump on slide.
It's what I said before. I mean, one-way content publishing, which I maintain is 80% of the web, is absolutely the domain of server-rendered HTML. I just saw an article the other day where a guy got an archive of every single one of his tweets, like all 20,000 of his tweets, and he put them in one HTML page. It was an 8.5 megabyte HTML page, and he brought it up in a browser, and he measured how fast it got to the first contentful paint on the screen. And it still beat a single tweet from twitter.com by 200 milliseconds. It's like, when you're downloading megabytes of JavaScript framework and then making multiple calls back, essentially we've gotten to the point where you're downloading an entire web application, JavaScript application, executing that, and then having it go back and get the data. And I'm old, but I question the value of that. You can just call me old-fashioned, but I just question the value of that. I do. But come back to the monolithic, please, because I got so much to say about that.
I call myself an old man for saying very similar comments all the time. A recent Astro.js, I don't know if anyone's seen that framework, but it's like this new idea that you just download the HTML and only use JavaScript for interactivity, and this is like a new paradigm. Don't get me started. Yeah, we've got some nods. Mick, when should they not do it?
I think two parts to this. If you've got to think about the challenge and the problem you're trying to solve. That really starts to dictate
what technology solution that you're going to be looking at or which approach you're going to take. Something that I think in the headless conversation does sometimes get forgotten is who's using the system in the first place. We think about we're delivering content to an end channel or an application, a website, what have you, and content creators, but who's actually using the CMS in the first place and what type of experience that they need to have about their day-to-day. We talk about being able to control the layout of a page and making sure that they have that flexibility to move components around and things like that. Different headless CMSs approach that in some different ways, but I think it can be challenged that, that visual experience is really important to a lot of the authors that are still out there. So I think, headless decisions come along and IT and developers have a big influence in making that headless technology decision. And then an organization will get that, they'll hand that over to their marketing and authoring teams, and the authors go, you didn't talk to me about how I need to use the system or what type of end goals I'm trying to achieve. And they just sort of get shuffled to the side, which just creates more problems in space to point before. So I think, again, it's that challenge, understanding the problem statement, what you're trying to really do and who's going to use that system. If it does match in web only, it can be hard to justify a pure play headless CMS.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think take into account your editors, they are the primary user of your CMS. I like to say that when you're if you're choosing a CMS today, you should they all do 99% of the same stuff equally well. So you should really choose for what your editors have the best experience. And I think that is something that is under prioritized when you're selecting a CMS. I think it is extremely important that your editors are happy and then that they know and feel empowered to do whatever they want to do, and be in control of everything. And as you're saying, sometimes that is content and layouting and stuff. Sometimes it's just content. But putting your editors in the center, I think that's very important. And I think to answer the original questions of when you should not go headless, I think yes, it's the reverse of my answer from before. So if you only have a few or one moving parts to your system, and if you primarily have one channel, I think it's you should absolutely go with that one not headless or server side rendered approach.
Great, some honest answers there, and I appreciate you guys answering when people should not use your own platform. That's excellent. I think I was going to ask when headless is right, but I think we basically covered that, and I might come back to that at the end for a final. So just ponder that for a final statement right at the a one sentence to answer the question the panel poses when it's headless right. But for now, before we move on to the questions, which there are quite a few coming in from the audience, I might just give you guys a final freebie question. What's coming up in the pipeline for your platforms, guys? Anything exciting in the future, especially around the sort of headless versus traditional subject? Who haven't we started with? Let's go. You're always last recently, Phil. Let's start with you.
Thank you. Well, I think in our approach, one of the things I'm most excited about is, as I was explaining in the beginning, we have our traditional CMS that has some headless capabilities, and then we have the software as a service product that was, its own product. And the direction we're going is we're making sure that these two products align, so they use the same spec for the APIs and stuff, so you can switch back and forth between the two. So if you want to start out in the classic CMS and have Razor render your templates, because we're on .NET, you can do that. And then if you want to change later, it's just a matter of switching over, and then you're on the software as a service system, and all your content flows over. But of course, now you need to take care of all the rendering and stuff. So that's the direction that we're going, trying to align the two, so the switch between them will be a lot easier, and you get the best of both worlds.
And on to you next, Nick.
So for us, I think XM Cloud is our SaaS offering for hybrid, but headless. So you've got that choice, right? Where you are still wanting to build in that traditional method, XM Cloud's got you sort of covered there, but you can still operate with it in a headless mode. So having the content delivery network behind sort of those API calls and getting that performance out of it. The value add that we are bringing out with that too soon is front end as a service. So I think this is a market that's really starting to explode as well. So being able to actually build and compose in a low no code way that front end experience, but really use that across any website. It's technology agnostic in that sense. So XM Cloud is really pushing up into that space around that enterprise level CMS, which still has its position, and we still have those various use cases that need to be solved out of that. But there is that very much pushing market around the pure play headless CMS, and we've launched Content Hub 1, which is a pure play headless CMS. So it is addressing that lower mid-tier market, but it's about that rapid time to market is really what that's addressing.
We're going all in on GraphQL, which I think is very, very healthy for both us and the industry as a whole. I'm so happy that there's a standardization around content retrieval. We're going into GraphQL so hard that it's almost not an exaggeration to say in the future, if you buy products from Optimizely, you will be buying a GraphQL API and deciding what products you want to plug into that. So as you buy more products from our suite, it will just expose new functions and resolvers in GraphQL. I think that's just, GraphQL is an incredibly healthy thing for the industry. We were a little late to it, but we are going in heavily. CMS is already exposed through GraphQL. CMP will be, but the second half of this year.
People watching who aren't across GraphQL, I'm pretty sure all of these guys would agree that it's worth looking into. Jake?
So in CMS, multi-site support. So for those of you who don't know, we have a product called Web Spotlight. So several years ago, Web Spotlight was released. It's part of our CMS, and what that does is it allows you to manage your content in a web-centric way. So I guess visually you get the information architecture on the left, which is a content tree. You can pull in your front end. So when you look at your pages on the right-hand pane, based on your content tree, you've got a preview of your home page, of your internal pages. You've got on-page editing as well. So it gives you that excellent web-centric editor experience for your content. So what we're now pushing out is multi-site. So you'll be able to pull in multiple front ends, all completely different front end channels, and you'll be able to switch them in Web Spotlight and manage the information architecture separately and the on-page editing on those. So it'll be a really good experience in that multi-site sense. And that's something we'll keep enhancing in all our subsequent releases. So we're really going to be pushing hard on that one.
Yeah, like Web Spotlight, Content Stack have an editor since that allows you to drag and drop or web and apps as well. So you get that sort of traditional experience in a headless environment. One of the important things to think about throughout this whole chat as well, I think, is around headless and where that falls, because there's considerations around headless and not headless, but there's actually a bigger conversation around MAC, which is this microservices, best of breed technologies, having systems which are built to integrate through API burst, cloud. Do you want to go SaaS or do you want to have a managed service? And of course, that headless, so you can do all the channels. So in terms of us, we're native to that Mac. We're one of the founders of that, but we're actually pretty low into making that performant and integratable with other systems, primarily commerce, translation, but also CDPs as well. So there's a lot of effort going into these connectors with those systems, or else making that some part quicker for that. When you use those, we've seen a lot of sites on that on Content Stack. Phase 1 going live in a matter of just weeks. So yeah, that's particularly.
Thanks, Jerry. I see. I can't resist it. You just started talking about composability, and we have the monolithic trigger. Sorry, can I say it? Monolithic trigger before. I wanted to ask one more question before we go into the audience panel. Basically, this is a question I would have typed in a Slido, so I get to go first. What does composable mean to you? I know that every different vendor seems to have a slightly different approach to composable here, and please, go easy on each other. What does composable mean as opposed to other terms such as?
Well,
Who wants to go first? Okay. You go, Jake. I think it's content made reusable in the most optimized sense. Composable.
Yeah.
Composable. What does composable mean to you as opposed to some other terms people throw in? Yep. So I think, let me start again. I think so composable to us, because we're a pure, we're a pure cloud-based CMS. We're not a DXP, which has services that we can switch on and off. Composable to us is really in that wider architecture. So it's giving you the freedom to plug in anything that you want. So whether it be some service from the Mac Alliance, which will play more nicely with the CMS, or whether it's something custom or something completely obscure from some company that no one's ever heard of that just happens to have an API and might work, you've got the freedom to do that. I guess the other sort of differentiator from that composable architecture perspective is, and I sort of hate saying this, but you could also swap the CMS out if you wanted to, because it's just a cog in the machine. It's just another piece. So yeah, I think that frames nicely what composable means in that pure headless sense. What do you call it? Plug and play. Yes. Who wants to go next? Who's looking at the candidates? Dean's trying to hold back. Go for it, mate.
All right. I've got beef with the term monolith, because I want to say for the record, nothing good has ever been described as monolithic. It's this pejorative, vaguely insulting term. If I went home and I said to my wife, honey, my love for you is monolithic, she wouldn't talk to me for weeks after that. So it's become this like vaguely pejorative, insulting term, which I really, really dislike. And I think that it's just the monolithic composable dichotomy is so false. We have many customers using our CMS with some other delivery method, with some other CDP, with some recommendations engine. I just talked to a customer 2 hours before I showed up here. They have our CMS. They want to look at our recommendations engine. They might pick somebody else's. The idea that our suite of products is all or nothing is just flat false. And when it comes to composability, I want to point out, we composed our own suite. We acquired 5 companies in 2 years. Our suite is literally composable because we composed it ourselves from a variety of different vendors. And we have customers that have been on our platform for 20 years. Well, we just acquired a CDP 2 years ago. They're not using our CDP. They're using something that they've used for years. The other phrase I have beef with, God bless you, Jake, is the phrase swap it out. That to me is a wild oversimplification of how these things work. I worked services for 15 years. You don't really swap anything out. It's more complicated than that. And I think GraphQL is very much going to help us as an industry. If you're not familiar with GraphQL works, GraphQL is a federated API, meaning you can use it to talk to one system, but then you can also plug in other systems and expose new functions. And I think once we all kind of standardize on GraphQL and expose our products to GraphQL, the idea of swapping it out is probably closer to reality. But the idea that this is just plug and play, I mean, you don't just swap an engine out of a car. It's like a whole thing, you know? So I just think that composable, monolithic, false dichotomy, and there's a lot of lip service being paid to the idea of interchangeability, which in practice is much harder than it seems. That is my rant for you.
We've had plug and play, we've had false dichotomy, pejorative, and vaguely insulting. Now, let's, who wants to go next?
Sorry, we've had a line in quite a few of our statements here to a degree. I think customers, I think that there's a term that gets bandied around. We bought a Ferrari, but we're using a Toyota or something to that sort of that nature. And I think what we're seeing is that companies need to start at a point, and they may not be ready for all of those things. To the point before is that you need to have the ability to grow into a solution stack. So we're very similar in that is breaking down monolith into a composable nature. But the whole point though is being able to build up that when customers ready to actually, and they get the maturity level to be able to start leveraging those phrases around personalization or we need a CDP is getting ready for that particular process. I think on the flip side of that as well, though, is customers out there are looking at consolidation. They're not looking at actually buying lots of different technologies. They're all being pressured very, very highly to look at their cost. Profitability is just a big part of the world we're in today. So, and consolidation really fits squarely into that. So, I think the benefit there for the likes of Cycor, I'll say Optimizely as well, and we're all friends, is being able to give that customer the ability to start small with your ecosystem, build up with those different capabilities like a CDP with a personalization tool and the like, but still stick with a single vendor in that. That's a really attractive thing for customers out there when you're starting to talk to the CTOs and up the chain. That's a focus. If you can't demonstrate that and show the value in that space there, then yeah, it's a big challenge.
That's it. Thanks. Philip, got anything to add?
Yeah, I was clapping out here. Afadine, thank you for putting into words some of my frustration as well too. So thank you. But to answer the question about composable, I think to me it all comes down to I think eventually this term will come into conclude in the marketplaces that are all around, because that's where the composability is comes into practice. That's where you can actually use it, and whether that's then some components from the same vendor and some components from another vendor and some components that run on the same server and some components that run in the cloud or run on some other server, that's all implementation details. That should be up to the organization building the project, right? So I think it comes down to the ease of integration and availability of pre-existing integrations.
Jerry, anything to add then?
Okay, right. But and I think the composable approach, I think there is a certain point that these got that changing things in and out, it's not a flick of the switch pretty much. But one of the things you can do with composable is grow with that. You go with one big platform or suite or whatever it's called, whether it's multiple players, you might not be using a lot of that, but things like personalization, search, you can swap those out pretty quickly and easily. And you might not even need to pay for them until you do need them. Things like A/B testing, personalization, etc. As opposed to might be that you need some additional signage at stage 3. You don't really know. So being able to swap in and out those sort of more fringe services is really a big advantage of that composable approach. And for teams that are trying to save money, having the choice to not pay for them now and know that they can still integrate those and use those in a very seamless way in the future is a massive advantage. So I wouldn't have thought that one size fit all on one vendor is really helping those services we put together for every single customer, plus retail, financial services, government, etc. We're trying to do 1 channel, 3 channels, 5 channels. That'll be pretty hard, right? So we're about choosing the right services for the right project, the right time.
That's all right. Thanks, Jerry. Now, ding ding. All right. Thank you very much, guys. Now that was really good. There's some good. You've just taken a big breath there, Dean. We're about to add a final comment, or can I move on?
That's a good thing.
All right. Thanks very much, guys. That was really good. There's some good, two clear sort of perspectives there. But thanks for acknowledging each other. It's great. I might move on to the audience questions now. We've got a couple of pretty popular ones. We've got one from Dinesh here, who says headless platforms need a lot of forethought in terms of dev and hosting infrastructure. Everyone agrees on that one. Vendors are now looking at offering the hosting of the head. Headless vendors are looking at offering the hosting of the head. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, you've had that. I mean, you've had like Netlify and Vercel and those companies that kind of host the head. Vercel created Next.js and they do kind of commercial Next.js hosting. And these are people that are really hosting. They have hosting platforms and like CI/CD platforms. And so it depends how far you want to define hosting. I mean, are we just putting a set of files somewhere and serving them up? Or do you want a full-blown CI/CD testing infrastructure? And so kind of how deep do you want to go into the hosting part of that? There are companies that I think are commoditizing that and making it very easy. Vercel does a really nice job at that. So I think that will naturally evolve, but we're very much looking at offering the option to host a head that is not our delivery platform. And actually, you can do that on our systems. You can serve up a static head that talks to our content delivery API. And gets to what I call the postmodern CMS, right? The postmodern CMS is not simple anymore. It used to be we had a server and we had a browser and we just sent data across. And now there are so many different ways to mix and match hosting and repository and API federation. It gets very, very complex. And there will always be companies that come in and try to do it all. There will always be companies that let you pick and choose.
Some of the vendors hosting the head?
Depends on the industry you're in as well. When you're talking to, when you're in financial services and government, more often than not, they're using their own hosting capability, whether that's private cloud, public cloud. So it's flexibility for them as well. They want to own more of the security space around that hosting. So I think that plays a part into it as well. But then you've got the smaller style customers where they do want that taken away from them. They don't want to deal with it. They don't want to have to worry about it. Much to the SaaS, they don't want to have to worry about upgrades. They just want to be able to do the job that they need to do and get it out there. So hosting can be many shapes and forms. I think it's just understanding really what the customer has and how much effort they want to put into that, or how willing they are to put their effort into that space. There's many options out there for that.
I think we're seeing more and more of them. More and more of them of the work being done on the edge, as opposed to like on a central server somewhere. And I think that's a trend that's really good from a user perspective. Again, it's one of those things that might end up biting you in the ass from a sustainability standpoint, because you're doing the same work for each edge instead of doing them once and then distributing out static stuff. But yeah, it's a trade-off.
Yeah, I don't have much of an opinion really on that. I think in the smaller space, maybe that does become something that's a bit more attractive. Where customers might not want to have to deal with that themselves. At that enterprise level, I guess I've never sort of come across a case where any clients wanted us to host, where there will even be a conversation. They'll generally want to have full control over that channel. Yeah.
It's pretty much covered. I think that's if you get to the point where a headless vendor is hosting their head, is it really headless anymore? I wonder. I feel like in this industry, sometimes we turn around in circles and end up right back in the exact same spot. And so if like a Content Stack or Content AI were to host the head, aren't you now full stack CMS just kind of broken into pieces?
Sent the blue lines.
Right. There's just weird questions.
And say it because that's like optimizely you're making everything a GraphQL API, but then having it sort of available in boxes.
Yeah. And there's nothing simple about the marketing. It can be mixed and matched so many different ways.
That's definitely right. There's a lot of confusion out there.
There is a lot of
reality.
Right. And it's our fault, right? Vendors are blurring the lines so much that I don't blame customers for being confused at this point.
Excellent. I feel better about it too then. All right, we have one more question. The next highest rated question from the audience. This is a tough one considering you guys are currently all vendor side, but I'm pretty sure you all have experience on the other side of the fence. So be honest, would you consider it more effort to build the same website as headless or traditional, assuming everything else is the same? The front end framework that they're using, the UI is the same.
It depends so much on the website. Are we going to agree on what type of website? I can tell you I've built a static publishing website both ways, and it's much, much easier traditional. But I can see it. I mean, if we just change the site scenario, the answer would be the opposite.
It depends. And it depends what frameworks we want to use. With an insurance company in the UK, they went like in 2 weeks. It's like, how to do that? Well, use quite a pre-built components. When you React, server-side generated, done, 100% secure, really good performance. But it's that complexity of personalization. How big is the piece how long is the piece it varies.
Right. I think the one thing we can agree on is that's, without more detail, I don't know that that's an answerable question.
I think the point that almost you started out with making, Dean, with like the distribution of your workforce, I think that's an answer to that question again, because it comes down to what kind of developer are you? Because if you are more of a front-end developer and you want to point and click your way through a model and then having the content available, then going headless is absolutely easier for you and faster. But if you're used to, or like if you're a more classic back-end developer and you know C# or whatever language you use on the server, like of course that will be easier to use. I agree that there's no one answer to that question.
Any more comments, new guys?
I'm just going to say that I take the adjective classic and I put it right there with monolithic.
Right.
I mean, classic is maybe seems a little nicer, but for Philip to say a classic back-end developer.
Sorry. Yeah, sorry.
Enough.
I hated myself.
Classic backend developer, I mean classic ASP, which is right. Long time ago. Yeah. OG. Are there any industries that you guys see particularly focusing on your platform more than other industries? This is a question from Anonymous.
In the context of headless still, I'm assuming.
Just in your particular platform, which industry do you see, if any, focusing more than other industries on your platform? Or is there such a thing?
Say much for us. It's pretty broad. Retail is a big one, but the biggest one for us that's different, like Ed says, gaming. We've got a huge number of gaming customers that use us as in product games and their website and the mobile apps to get that all in channel thing. But I think that's the biggest customers we've got our gaming.
I think our standard answer for the vendors is high tech, healthcare, and banking. But just maybe that just might be a function of, economics or budgets or anything. I feel like you and I are in the same boat. We're fairly general across the board.
Yeah, I think for us, it's pretty general as well. What we are seeing though is over here in Europe, at least, there's a lot of RFPs where there's a prerequisite on being open source, and of course that's an automatic quantifier for us and not for everybody else. But yeah, I think we're all over the place as well.
I think trying to keep slightly on topic as well, but I think customers are still catching up on this concept a lot as well. I mean, if we look at the RFPs that we get as a vendor, there's still very much focused around not just the CMS, but they want search, they want forms, they want personalization in some form or shape in there as well. So I think that's still catching up to split out the RFPs and what the customer is really looking for in that full holistic sense. Not so much the time, wanting all of that in one go, but their intention and goal is to get to that point, and they want to know how they're going to be able to get there. So the customers haven't fully transitioned yet, I don't believe, into that full, I'm just going out for a true headless CMS from an organizational perspective. I think there's still drivers from parts of the organization that are focusing on that. So you have IT developers I think are still pushing very hard for the headless focus on that. So I think you have to keep that in mind as well when we're talking about that topic too.
Now at this point, we've nearly run out of time for the Q&A. So I'm just going to do one more question from the audience and then my final statement question. There are more questions in Slido. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to collect those afterwards. And these guys don't know this yet, but I'm going to have a chat with them, interview them, and see if I can gather some thoughts on more of these questions, because there's a bunch of questions there, and we might distribute them via a blog post or something like that afterwards, if you guys are cool with that. So hopefully this one isn't the most conflict, and this might be a plant from some of the audience, but how does the editing experience compare between a headless and a more traditional approach to CMS? Who wants to go first?
Okay, for sure. I don't think it actually makes a difference, but I think it is only platform and can build already bad headless platform. As a traditional that whole to edit will do it. So I don't think that a lot of the headless, maybe the ones in the Mac Alliance come through in the last few years, have been the one standards pretty easy to use. But that doesn't mean all of the headless ones. And the other than not.
Yeah, that's I'm sure.
I think it's sort of like that question about, what would it be easier to build a website in
I guess in that same sort of vein. It really depends on the CMS platform. Yeah, both usually offer some sort of way of editing content in a structured manner and also in a visual manner as well. So yeah, it really sort of depends on a person's preference maybe at the end of the day, but I think there are a lot of similarities.
I wonder if the question is asking you the editing experience or the preview experience, because I think that there is kind of structured form-based editing, which we all do very well. But then there is editing based on the channel, right? Channel-specific editing. I want to edit this as a web page, like compositional, drag things around and see what it looks like before I publish. I want to edit this as a native app. And if you're going to do channel-specific editing, a CMS that has access to that channel is going to have an automatic advantage there. So I think channel-specific editing, a system which owns the channel is going to do better than a system that doesn't.
I can agree with all of that. I can then come back to who's using the system. If they have a requirement to have that experience of authoring a page in line, those sorts of things, and I think the Headless, they're starting to catch up in that space as well and provide more capability in that. But if there's no requirement for that and the channel doesn't dictate the need for it, then the experience can be quite simple from a perspective. But if it's not, and you need that complexity around that, and you need the flexibility to potentially customize some of those things as well, then the editing experience can be really important. And I think just to drive that point home a little bit as well, it's often forgotten. Content authors have always been forgotten, I think. In my experience over the years, they're always the last to know, but they're the ones that are impacted a lot in that day-to-day. If they're not being efficient in what they can do, they can't prove that case back to their higher-ups in the chain as well. So it's just something to continually think about. What's the problem you're trying to solve for who?
Yeah, it's interesting to see. Someone mentioned earlier, like it feels like sometimes we're going in circles and coming back to where we started. And I feel like for the editing experience, that's been happening. Like 20 years ago, everybody was building, in-page editing, and then we went to form-based, and now even the headless CMSs are starting to build in-page editing. While if we asked them 5 years ago, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but I think there was a sense that why would we do in-page editing? Because we're not only for one specific context, and I mean that's still the approach that we do. That we think rich previewing in different on the different media makes sense. But when you have typically a multi-channel thing where you have multiple use cases for the same content, we think like I don't want to say traditional or classic, but like a form-based approach to content is what I consider the best approach for the editors.
Okay, so we've got people saying eye off the drink fridge here in this room. So I'm going to close off and ask everyone for the answer I asked you mentally before, which you've probably forgotten the question. Question is basically, I'll make sure I get it right. What did I write down? How can an organization decide whether headless is a good fit for them? Let's start here, Joe.
Starting here. Okay. What's the key to that really is working out the channels that they want to be pushing out and using, whether that's wall and web, whether they've got a propensity to go SAMs, or they happen to do managed service and other ways of hosting sites. And if their developers probably have a choice, or the agents that they're used can have a say in that as well. So it comes down to a number of different factors really, but I think that if it's multi-channel and you want to use some of those modern frameworks and go to a SaaS microservice approach, go headless. If it's single channel, traditional, low budget, go traditional.
If the organization has a content-first approach, so content is the heart of their operations, Headless CMS is an excellent content hub for that, just based on the content operations that it allows you to do at that greater level. And yeah, if the content will be propagated to multiple channels other than a web, then definitely headless is a tick.
Okay, I just want to clarify. We've monolithic, classic, traditional, and now you just threw in low budget. Which...
I'm giving bonus.
Yeah, I want you to know I'm keeping track. You know, there's a great line from a Taylor Swift song. It says, "I bury hatchets, but I keep maps of where I put them." So I just keep track of these things. Here's the thing: when you talk about headless, you need to articulate about it. You need to explain to me what you plan to gain by that. How this situation is going to be better from a staffing perspective, from a user experience perspective. And if you can't articulate that, don't do it. We see people just with vague ideas, and the idea of why they want to do it is because an analyst told it would be important. And maybe the more sinister thing, and I certainly don't want to call into question service providers in the room, we have a lot of customers that they think are being led down a path by their service provider, by their implementer, by their system integrator, because there is a very large number attached to the services around a headless implementation oftentimes. And I see situations where I feel like a customer is being sold a bill of goods because there's a very attractive invoice at the end of that path.
Yeah. I think I agree with that sentiment. I think very well put. I feel like I'm repeating my words, but the challenge, the problem statement, I don't think there's a black and white answer to should I go headless or should I not. There's so many things that you need to take into consideration to get to that answer. So, you know, if you're interested in that and you want to know and figure out what that right decision is, when you're engaging a vendor like anyone up here, it's asking those right questions, but also the vendor can't sit down with you and work out what the actual problem is you're trying to solve and for whom and for those specific channels, then it's going to be very hard to make a decision around that. So you've got to understand what you're trying to solve for in the first place. Look at those end channels, and then you might get to that point where you say, yeah, actually headless is the right approach for me. I know what my skill set of my current developers are. This is the budget we have, and that's going to be the right fit at this particular point in time, knowing this is where we want to grow to. Or it might be on the complete flip side, and a traditional CMS might require the right option in that world, right? It's depends all the time, and I hate saying it, but it's so true. So you've got to understand it. You've got to understand the problem and how you're going to solve for it, deliver the value back to the customer, and if they understand where that's coming from and how they're going to get there, then that's the best result for them.
Yeah. So many good points. It does, as you say, come down to it depends, and it depends on a lot of stuff. There's so many moving parts to this. I think if I have to make it simplistic, it comes down to like number of channels and number of moving parts or like integrations that you need, and those are probably the two most deciding factors. And then the skill set that you have, the abilities that you have in house or with your agency, probably after that.
I promised I would call it there. Thank you very much. If I could, in the room, I get a round of applause for our panelists. Thank you very much. Thanks again to Jerry from Content Stack, Jake from Content.ai, Dean from Optimizely, Mick from Sitecore, and Philip from Embraco, who joined us over breakfast from Denmark. Thank you very much. So that's going to conclude the presentation from this end. Thank you for joining us online and in the room. We will provide a recording of this at a later date, but thank you very much. Everyone have a good night.
Thanks.
Please,
Well done.
and please, for the people here, please feel free to hang around.